Hi, welcome to my channel, See Mary Make, and today I'm going to show how to make a pretty simple Christmas stocking using a sewing machine. So I'm going to start with my materials. Here I have my stocking pattern, which has just been traced off of another pattern. You can buy a pattern for a stocking somewhere, Hobby Lobby, Walmart, Joann's, places like that. Or you can even probably print one offline off of like Etsy. Also, you can just take a stocking you have already or buy like a cheap one from the dollar store and trace around it on a sheet of paper. Or if you're confident enough, you can sketch it yourself on a sheet of paper. So my pattern pieces, all I have is the stocking and the cuff, which I'm showing here. I have two different sized cuffs. I'm going to use my larger one for this. Next I have my outer fabric, which is just a cotton fabric. My inner fabric, which is flannel. You can use cotton or something else. And then my cotton fabric I'm using for the cuff, and my batting, which I'm using 100% cotton batting. Low loft, I believe is what the batting's called. Then I have sewing pins, my sewing scissors, my rotary blade, rotary cutter, and also my rotary mat. So I'm going to start by laying my fabric out and putting my stocking on it. Now this fabric is directional, so I want to make sure I cut the stocking in the right direction for both the back and the front of the stocking. So I just folded it in half, making sure that the direction of the pattern is facing the right way for both. I folded it in half with the right sides together. You can fold it in half with the wrong sides together if you want, just as long as the same two sides at the back or the front are together. Now I'm just pinning my stocking pattern piece right on the front all the way around. And I hope you're in for a long video today, because this one's a long one, because I didn't want to cut any of the steps out. I wanted to at least show them each fully once for people who are maybe beginning sewers or don't have a lot of experience and are trying to learn. So I like to put a lot of pins when I pin a pattern piece down, because I want to make sure it stays in place while I'm cutting it. Some people don't pin at all, from what I hear. Some people only put, some on a corner here in the middle or something like that. I like to pin all the way around the edge. Now I'm showing that I have cut out my outer stocking, the lining, which is the inside, and my batting, all in the same manner. And I just used my rotary blade to cut right around each of them. You can use your scissors too. Now I'm pinning my cuff piece, and for my pattern, I have to pin the cuff, the edge of the cuff, on a fold. So I folded over just a piece of fabric that's just big enough for the cuff, and I'm going to cut two of those out because I'm using the same fabric for both sides of the cuff. And once again, I'm just going to pin all the way around it, and then I'm going to use either my rotary cutter or my scissors to cut around the edge of the pattern. Pretty sure I switched to my scissors at this point, if not pretty soon after. I was having problems with my rotary cutter. I think it's time to replace my blade, and I don't have any spare ones at the moment, so I just switched back to my fabric scissors. Sometimes it's just faster, especially if you've got a lot of straight lines, to use a rotary cutter, because it's quicker. You just go right along the line and slide it right across, and you're done. There's no lifting and turning and trying to maneuver the fabric to make sure the scissors stay right on it, and there's the cat getting in the way like always. Yeah, I'm using my scissors to cut this out. like I said, I'm going to cut 2 of these out. You need 2 pieces of the cuff. They don't have to be the same fabric, but I just use the same with mine because it's just easier. Then you don't have to worry about, oh, am I pinning, the right side down or up? Which isn't that confusing, but for some people it can be confusing. Sometimes it confuses me if I overthink it. So I've got this cut out now. And then, of course, take all the pins out, put it off to the side, and move on to my next step, which I have to cut a piece of batting too. After, and there's the cat again. She was attacking the fabric every time I moved it. So now I've got both pieces of, or both my front and back of my cuff and my batting cut. Now I'm going to make the loop to hang it by. And for this, I didn't have a pattern piece. I just cut a piece I figured would be good enough. I just used my little ruler here, and I cut a piece that was 3 inches by about 8 inches. And I just used my ruler as the guide to get a nice, perfect rectangle. And you only need one of those. Now I'm going to pin my batting to my fabric. And I'm going to pin the batting to the wrong side of my fabric, my outer layer of fabric. And I'm going to pin all the way around it, this time with the pins sticking, not going along the line so much, but running perpendicular to the edge of the fabric, because I'm going to have to sew this together. So now I'm going to take the other side of my stocking and I'm going to put the fabrics with the right sides together. So I'm going to lay that right on top of the other piece. And then I'm going to put my other piece of batting on it. And I'm going to pin that on. Then, in the same way, pins running perpendicular with the edge of the fabric all the way around. And you just want to make sure you go through all 4 layers completely with your pins. And once you do that, then it's time to pin together your lining. And with my fabric I used for my lining, it wasn't one-sided. You can use either side. So I just pinned those together real quick. And now I'm going to do my cuff too. So you're going to I put my batting down, then I put a piece, one of the cuff pieces with the wrong side on top of the batting. And then I took the other cuff piece and flipped the right side down to where, both right sides of the cotton were together. And now I'm just going to pin it along one of the long edges. It doesn't really matter which one. And once I get that done, and also make sure you're pinning perpendicular on the edge with this too, because whenever you pin you want to pin like this to actually sew the stuff together. Now, I'm going to talk about here, point at it. We need to leave an opening in the side of the lining to turn our stocking right side out once we're done putting the whole thing together. And I like to do a pretty large one for this project because you're pulling a lot of layers through this hole. So I like to do about 4 to 5 inches. And the way I mark that is I like to put 2 or 3 pins in one spot. So when I see that as I'm sewing, it reminds me to stop there and restart at the next set of pins. And if I do not double or triple pin it like that, I will forget every time and have to go back and rip my seam open. So now I'm folding my loop in half with the right sides together and just pinning along that long edge, because that's how we're going to sew that together as well. Yeah, and this, I mean, I don't usually use the loops, but this year I decided to hang my stocking up. So this is not the first stocking I've made. The first two I made, I didn't even put the loop on it. So now I'm going to sew the loop together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just doing a straight stitch, a small one, because it's only 2 layers of fabric. And you make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end, which means to go backwards and forwards a little, once or a couple times. Some people only do it once. I like to do it like 2 or 3 times just to make sure it's good and knotted in there real good. Now I'm going to work on sewing the lining together. Same thing, back stitch at the beginning a couple times and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm stopping where I put all the pins to remind me to stop, to leave my opening for turning right side out. And if you're using, I don't think I mentioned it before, if you're using a one-sided fabric for this, make sure the right sides are together while you're sewing the lining together as well. So I'm going to go just all the way around it. And I'm pulling my pins out as I go. You can leave them in and just sew right over them. A lot of people do. My mother does. But whenever I do, I always end up breaking a needle. So I just pull them out as I go, or I try to. Sometimes I miss a few. And I just got tired of breaking my sewing needles. So I just stopped sewing over the pins for the most part, unless it's something that I absolutely have to, like it just needs the pins in there while I'm putting it. I like to pull them as I go. And I'm going to back stitch at the end of this again and just trim the excess thread off. And I have to go back and trim it off on the other end too, and where the opening is. Once I get that done, then I'm going to start on sewing the outer fabric of the stocking together, or the right side. And I'm just going to go all along the edge, just like I did with the lining, 1/4 inch seam allowance with pulling my pins out as I go, and back stitching at the beginning and the end. And something I don't think I recorded in this is you want to clip your curves a little bit after you finish sewing them together. It just makes it look better once you turn it right side out and iron it, because around the seams you can get a flatter, tighter appearance if you don't have as much bulk, especially where it's curvier. So around the toe and the heel, I think, is the only part I really needed to trim on this project. And you don't want to go too close to your stitching. I mean, you want to get close to it, but you don't want to get so close that if it unravels a teeny tiny bit, that it's going to fall apart. So once I'm done with this part, then you're going to do the same thing. You want to back stitch at the end and trim off your excess thread on both sides. And after that, you're going to move on to sewing your cuff together. And I know this is getting a little repetitive, but just start by back stitching at the beginning and just going along with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And like I said, I'm going to pull out my pins as I go on pretty much everything, as long as it's not like a really teeny piece. and just go all the way to the end and back stitch at the end too. Okay, next we need to turn our loop right side out. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start by just pulling one of the edges down over itself, like folding it outward over itself. And then I'm going to use this ink pen that I showed you, not with the tip out. And I'm going to help use that, or I'm going to use that to help shove the rest of the loop through itself and pull it right side out. I hate doing this part. It's like the worst part to me. You can also use like an unsharpened pencil or a like a chopstick or a dowel. Don't use anything pointy though, because you're going to end up stabbing a hole in your fabric. Once that's right side out, then you'll need to iron it because it's going to be really crinkly from turning it. And all these pieces actually you need to iron as you're going. I didn't show it, but you should iron your fabric. Honestly, before you get started, I prefer to cut out and then iron though, because I feel like I'm wasting time ironing a huge piece of fabric if I'm not going to need it. Now I'm trimming some of the excess fabric off of the edge of my cuff that I sewed together already. And then I'm going to open the cuff up so I can sew it together the rest of the way, but I'm going to iron it in between this. And yeah, so I'm going to take it over the iron and iron it like this, the way it would actually be on the piece. And I'm also going to, oh, I did record it. Here's me trimming some of the excess fabric off of my lining as well, which I guess isn't footage that's actually needed, but may be helpful for some people. I don't know. It could be. I'm just going all the way around it with one of my smaller pairs of scissors. Like I said, don't get too close to the stitching because you don't want it to fall apart if it unravels a teeny bit. And that's it. Just cut it off. Iron. Leave your lining inside out, because it needs to stay inside out. And when you're trimming this, make sure not to trim off where the excess fabric, where the open edge is on it, because you're going to need that there to sew it closed afterwards. So now I'm going to turn my stocking, the outer part of my stocking, right side out. Just reach your hand on in and pull the toe up through the ankle part. And now it's right side out. It's pretty simple. Take your ink pen or chopstick, pencil, whatever you're using, and press it against your seams to make sure they're good and turned completely. Don't skip that step. Now I'm going to show you what not to do, because this is a huge mistake I made, because my kids kept stopping me to ask me questions, and then I like pick up in the wrong spot and do things incorrectly and have to go back and fix them. That happens several times in this. This is one I could not fix. I didn't fix until the end, and I show you how I fix it, in a manner of speaking. So it shows I'm pinning my loop onto my stocking. Don't do this. I repeat, do not do this part. And I left this here to stress not to do this, because this is wrong. And I lost a lot of time making this and recording this as a result. You should actually pin the cuff around it first and then pin on your loop.
Of me making the cuff. Don't know what happened, but it's not there. So I'm gonna explain it real quick before I finish putting this together. So what I did is, here's the cuff after you sew the top together, so I have that part. So you need to separate it, pulling it apart, just the outer layer, one of the sides from the side with the batting. You open it up full and it would be completely open. This side would not be sewn together. It would be one big rectangle. So what you're going to do is, with the right sides of the fabric together, so the wrong side out facing you, you want to fold it in half and pin along this edge, the open edge. And so that means on one side you're only going to have 2 layers of fabric, and on the other side you're going to have 4 layers at the seam, because you're going to have batting on each side and then the outer shell on each side, the actual material of the cuff. So you're going to pin these together, and then once you do that, you're going to sew them together, making sure to follow the shape of the cuff, whether it's a straight line or a curve like this one. This one's a curve, so I had to come in and then curve back out right along here too. Then once you do that, you're going to hold this open, put it on your ironing board, and you're going to iron your seam open like this all the way down. Now, whatever you're using for batting, you have to be careful with the iron. If it's not 100% cotton batting like this is, if it's like fleece or a poly batting, like, what is that stuff called? I don't remember what it's called. But it's not real cotton, so you can't put the iron on it. I can put the iron on mine because mine's 100% cotton. So if you're using something else, which, like I said, you could use a fleece for a batting, or a polyfill batting, is that what it's called? I'm not sure. But you would want to lay like a clean dish towel or rag, or something that you can put an iron on top of this before ironing it, because you would not want to melt your batting or whatever you're using for batting. So once you've ironed your seam open like this one, then you're simply going to turn this. You're going to pull the one layer down over the batting. And I know, bear with me, it looks like a hot mess at the moment, but it won't in a second. And you're just going to make sure to line it up together, and make sure you're pulling all the way down at your seam here. And now you have a nice beautiful cuff. You should also iron after you turn, because turning tends to wrinkle things. I've already ironed mine, so I'm not going to iron it again. And then if you have a curved edge like mine does, you just want to make sure to push that out a little bit there so it doesn't bunch up or get weird shaped or anything. Alright, sorry about that. I hope that explained it well enough. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll get back to you, especially on this part that I lost the footage to somehow.
Okay, so there I am pointing at my loop, which is in the wrong spot. You should pin the cuff on first, which is what I'm doing now, and then pin the loop to the outside of the cuff, lining it up and centering it with the seam that runs along the back side, or the back edge of the stocking down the heel. Do not pin the loop on first. I stress to you. Pin your cuff on all the way around like I'm doing here. and then pin your loop to the outside of the cuff. I'm just going to pin all the way along the top of this, making sure to get through all the layers of fabric, which there's quite a lot at this point, because you've got your cotton and your batting, then your other 2 pieces of cotton and batting. So you're going through 5 layers. Then once you add the loop on that edge, that's going to be like 7 layers to go through. So it's a lot of fabric to get a sewing pin through, especially if you have little short pins. So I also like to use quilting pins when I'm doing projects like this, or any project for that matter, just because they're longer and seem pointier. I don't know if they actually are sharper, but they seem like they are. Once you get this pinned all the way around, you just want to make sure to line the edges up, and you're just going to sew all the way around the top, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and end. And for me, I like to use a larger stitch when I'm going through this much fabric at once. I think I put it on like a 3.5 or 4. And I also took part of, I don't even know what that thing is called on the front of the machine, but I took that plastic piece off to give me a little more room to pull and turn the stocking as I go. And I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this part too. It's 1/4 inch the whole way on the whole thing. And I'm just sewing it all the way around the top. Pulling out my pins as I go, especially with all these layers I'm going through. And sewing my loop into the wrong spot. Once again, I'm going to say this for like the millionth time now. Do not do that. Pin your loop to the outside of your cuff, not between your cuff and your outer stocking. So now I'm just going to trim up the edge of this a little bit and trim the excess thread that was hanging on off. Now that that's done, it is time to pin your lining. And your lining is, like I said, right sides together still, so it's still inside out. You want to pin it to the outside of the stocking. So you want to slide the actual stocking into the inside of the lining, which means you're going to be sewing the lining and the stocking with the right sides together. Make sure your stocking is facing the right way too. Make sure your toe is in your toe. Try and line up your seams. You should be able to. And I always just like to start with one of the seams and just start pinning from there. And I go all the way around the top of this. And we're just going to pin the whole thing right at the top, because we're going to turn it through that opening we left in the lining. So this is what's going to give us that nice, pretty finished look where you can't see really any of the seams, is because we're sewing it together with the right sides together and then turning it. So I'm just going to pin, like I said, all the way around the top. And once you get that done, I'm just going to sew it together around the top. And if you have pinned your loop in the right spot, then this would pretty much be your last step besides turning it and closing the opening in the lining. Also, something I didn't mention before, if you don't hang your stockings, you don't need the loop and you can just totally omit it. I've never hung stockings before until this year because we never really had a spot to hang them. So I'm sewing this together now. You're going through a lot of layers at this point. So you want to make sure you got a good heavy duty needle on your machine. And I'm doing, once again, a 1/4 inch seam allowance and back stitching at the beginning and the end, and pulling my needles out as I go because I don't want to break my actual needle on my machine. And I'm still using a larger stitch on this. I feel like if you put a really tight stitch in something like this that's this thick, if you need to take it apart for some reason, which I did need to take mine apart to fix my loop, then you're not going to be able to get it apart because you're not going to be able to find the stitching because it's so teeny. So now I'm just trimming all of my extra thread off, and now I'm going to pull it. I'm going to reach through that opening we left, that 5 inches open in the lining, and I'm just going to pull the whole rest of the stocking through that. And then as you pull it, and pull it on, so you got to pull the cuff through. That's why I left such a big opening. And then keep turning the lining right side out too. Now it looks like this kind of deflected looking thing. But you want to make sure you go ahead and finish turning everything completely while the opening is still open. Then you can hand stitch that closed if you want to, especially if you want like a really invisible stitch, like a ladder stitch, but I don't, because it's going to be on the inside of the stocking. No one's going to be seeing it. I'm just going to pin it. I'm going to fold it inward a little bit, pin it with my sewing pins, and then I'm just going to run it right through my machine on a straight stitch, a small straight stitch. Back stitching at the beginning and the end. And this one, I didn't really use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I just went as close to the edge of the fabric as I could. And see, I didn't pull my pins out with this one. It's because I was getting excited. I was almost done, or I thought I was almost done. But as you all already know, I have to fix the loop. Okay, so now I am just going to push the lining right inside of the stocking. Get it all tucked in, toe to toe and heel to heel. Push it in there good. You want to give it a good iron after this, because if you've sewn it together correctly, you will be done at this point, but not me. Here I am realizing that my loop is nowhere to be found, and I've made a horrible mistake.
Okay, so I messed up on this part, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. It's honestly not a hard fix. I pinned the loop to the wrong side of the cuff. So I should have pinned it between the cuff and the lining, not the cuff and the outside of the stocking. So to fix it, I've gone ahead and I made a new loop the exact same way as I did before. And in order to fix this, I've had to go in and cut the loop from in between these two, which I just snipped it right off. I did not tear the seams up in there any. And so the reason I know how to do this is because the first stocking I made did not have a loop on it, because we've never hung our stockings up before. We've never had any place to hang them. So when I decided this year I wanted to hang them off of the little banister on our stairs in the living room, I had to, which was my husband's stocking, I had to add a loop to it, and I wanted to do that without taking the whole thing apart. So I'm going to need a handy dandy seam ribber. Well, I'm going to open, there it is, open my seam up. It's on my Cricut machine, don't know why. Right where the seam to the cuff is and the seam to the lining is, I'm just going to tear a space big enough in the thread, not the fabric. You gotta break the thread with the seam ripper. And I'm just gonna tear a spot big enough for the loop to slide into. So in order to do that, I'm gonna pull the fabric, which you can't see real well. I don't know if it'll focus in on it. I'm going to pull it until I can see the stitches between here. It's super hard to see because the thread is white and it's barely showing. But once I see them, I'm just going to snag one with the tip of the seam ripper and push it through and pop that seam. And so I'm going to just keep going. I'm going to pull again, find the next one, and pop that baby too. I'm going to pull, pull, and pop it. And the reason you can do this is because we basted the cuff to the outside fabric. If we had not done that, popping these seams would take it apart all the way through and it would have to be redone entirely. But because we basted it like you're supposed to, you can open this one seam up where the lining is attached and the whole thing won't fall apart. Okay, so I've got probably about 1 inch of space open now that I can slide my finger into. I'm going to go just a little bit larger because we have to have room to actually fit it in there. And another thing is you want to make sure you're going an even amount on both sides. I mean, I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm not going to measure it. Because, yeah, who has time for that? Not me. That's part of the problem, like why I've made so many mistakes today is like time, because I've got like other things I need to get done, and then on top of that, like my kids have been, of course you won't see it in the video because I'll cut it out and you won't be able to hear it and you can't see them because it's focused on me, but they kept coming and like interrupting me and I kept having to stop, and I don't do well with stuff like this when I'm being distracted during it. So now the space is big enough and I'm just going to slide the loop in there. That's about long enough. And next I'm going to stitch it closed with, you guessed it, a good old-fashioned needle and thread. I'm going to try my best to show how I do this up close, so I'm going to have to turn the camera around. But yeah, so this little fun extended excursion here is not ideal, but it's not a deal breaker. It's doable. It's not necessarily hard, it just takes longer. Like I would have been completely done already if I hadn't have made this mistake. So try not to. So you don't have to go back and do this. Or if you don't hang your stocking, don't even bother adding a loop on. We usually just lay them under the tree. But I wanted to hang them off the rail this year. Alright, so I'll be back in a minute to show you how I sew this by hand. Okay, so alright, I'm gonna try really hard to stay in the screen on this. It's gonna be a little difficult because it's not the best lighting and it's a small spot. Okay, so we've got the loop in here, right? We've kind of just shoved it in. It's fine. So, and I've got my, don't know if you can see it, my needle and thread here. I've just got probably about a little more than a foot of thread here, about 1.5 feet maybe, at most. I like to have extra because it's horrible to run out in the middle because then you have to knot it twice. I don't like doing that. I'm rethreading and nope, that's like running out of bobbin in the middle of sewing on the machine. It's horrible. That's why if I know I'm going to need a lot of a color, I make an extra bobbin of it before I get started, so that I don't have to stop everything in the middle just to make a new bobbin. Okay, I'm going to get this, and you know what? Let me move. I have a better idea. Got this here. I'm going to start by sliding this in, coming out, because I want to hide the knot inside of it as best as I can, and that it's possible with this. Not that you're going to see it from so far away anyway, but alright, the knot is tucked inside. Now, I just put it right underneath the inside layer. Move everything out of the way that I can knock over. Okay. Now I'm going to go kind of back in right along the seam. I'm going to do what's called a ladder stitch, but it's going to be kind of unconventional as far as ladder stitches go. See, this is another thing you have to be careful of, is knotting when you have longer thread. So you can place a, you can't see it, you can place a finger inside of here to help keep that from happening. Okay, so I've gone into the little, not really a seam, but the part where it's folded over right here, where it's ironed over. And now I'm going to go kind of through the loop. Well, not kind of, I'm actually going to go through the loop. See, I'm pulling it out on the other side. I'm going to pull it through all the way. And if you need to, you can pin this, but I don't need to. So okay, you're going to pull that through all the way. Now I'm going to do a ladder stitch over here, which is, gosh, I keep coming out of frame, which is just me doing like this. Just go right through the edge of the cuff. And we're going to pull, pull, pull all the way gently as to not knot. Like going slow is the best with this, you know, like the whole like tortoise and hare, slow and steady wins the race type of thing. Like that's this. So I'm going to go back through the loop again now. The hanging loop, I guess you could call it. I'm going to do it like right where the stitch came out of the cuff at. And we're going to try and get as close as possible to the lining with it. So we're going to go right through. Pull slowly, put your finger in and stretch out the thread if needed, which I needed to because it's knotting up. Okay, and then pull it tight through. And then you're going to come down right below where it came out, right here, right below where it came out, and go right through the fold here again. So you want it to be a little thicker than that. There we go. So there's other ways you'd go about doing this, but this is the way I like to do it. Which I'll probably come back across it again. Once I go all the way across one way, I'll go back the other direction just to make sure it's secure, because, you know, these are going to be hanging with things in them. This will be much more secure if you just do it the right way the first time and sew it on your machine. So I'm just pushing back through the hanging loop again as close to the cuff as I can. And then I'm going to, right where it came out of the loop there, I'm going to go through the cuff again on the fold where the two seams actually are supposed to meet, and I'm going to pull my thread through, pulling it tight, and same thing over again. I'm going to show it one more time, and then I'm going to cut the camera off and finish it doing it this way. So, right back through the hanging loop, pull it tight. Let's check the other side and make sure, okay, it's good. Now we're going to go through the fold for the seam. Stay right along that fold if possible. Pull it down like that. And where it came out, right back through the hanging loop. Okay, so I'm just going to do that all the way down until I get to the end of the hanging loop. And then I'm going to do the same kind of stitching to stitch this little part where I popped the seam to fit the loop in right here. I'm going to do it back and forth right there, close it up. I'll show that too. Right across where the stocking keeps sliding off of the table. Maybe if I fold it like this, it'll stay better. Where am I? Okay. So we're in the cuff, we're going to go back to the lining again. Line. Pull through. Now we're back to the, I'm so sorry for shaking the camera, we're back to the loop, the hanging loop here, which, I'm going to go back through again, and I'm going to go all the way across to this end, do a little ladder stitch down here, and then knot it off, and I'm going to try to hide the knot somewhere. I might hide the knot in between. I might come back and hide the knot in between here. So now that I've gone through, back through the loop again, I'm going to do a ladder stitch right here in this area, so right on this side. So we're going to go right across to the other side, a little bitty vertical, horizontal. Why do I keep saying vertical? Horizontal stitch on that, right up against that seam. We're going to come right back across and do it again here. And we've got a knot, so we're going to fix the knot. The way you can do that is to this and then pull through while keeping your needle in, because I keep knotting up here. Okay, and I'm going to go across and back the loop, but so you put it in and I'm coming out one side of the loop because I want to hide the knot to this in here. And it seems pretty secure. Give it a good tug and it's not budging. So now we're gonna go in here, and I'm gonna take this needle through here, the inside. So now that we've got a loop, I'm going to and we're going to slide the needle through there, and then pull it tight as I can, and I found it. Go right back through it again. Oops. I think I've ever had that happen before. Right back through the same thread there, and I'm going to put my finger in here to make sure, there we go, that's tight. And we're just going to pull. And I'm going to go through it again. And we've got a lovely little knot there. That is not going to go anywhere. It's not coming out. And then I'm just going to snip this right on off.
All right, so here's my finished stocking hanging up in the middle right there with the snowman on it. I think it came out really good. I think these homemade stockings are just so cute. All of these, by the way, hanging up have been made by me, except the one with the angels on the end. My mother actually made that for me, and I just loved it so much. I thought that my whole family needed homemade stockings. They're so much more sturdier, I feel like, than a lot of the store-bought ones, and they just look so good. All right, I hope you enjoyed my video. Consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.